Morning glory, evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. As promised, Jake Tapper is here to talk about his brand new book, Race Against Terror. He worked the Caddyshack reference into Race Against Terror, so I had to give you an homage for that, Jake.
You always do that.
Welcome.
You're very good at that with the soundtrack. I remember when we did the interview on The Outpost, any
Yeah,
music or cultural reference in that 500-page book you used in a bump in. It was fantastic.
we're going to do the same thing when we come back for the second segment. But let me start with a little bit of a discussion here, framework. This is a very good book for non-lawyers, and it's a very good book for lawyers who've been engaged in the debate about whether or not the war on terror is a war or a criminal justice proceeding. Jake is a neutral in that. He's just reporting a story that ended up on the criminal justice side of the ledger. But Jake, last night I sent a note to Andy McCarthy, who I'm sure you know of if you don't know him personally, and I said, Andy, you're going to want to read Tapper's new book, Race Against Terror, because it's Exhibit 1 on why we ought not to criminalize the pursuit of terrorists. Because Spingool ought to have been at Gitmo like in day one, and if the Italians said no, we ought to cut off aid to him or something like that. Do you understand that's going to be half the reaction to the book?
Yeah, and I wrote it neutrally for that reason. In fact, you have in the book a lot of people prosecuting this terrorist because that's the best way that they can think of with the rules as they were in 2011, 2012 to get him off the streets. But as you know, at the very end of the book, the judge, who was a Bush appointee, Judge Cogan, he basically says what you just said, that he didn't understand, that he thought it was kind of a show trial, Obama showing off our ideals in a way that wasn't necessarily required, that Obama was the president and he could have done whatever. I mean, but I wrote it just as a story for people to interpret however they wanted to. I take that as a huge compliment
It's down the middle. And Judge
yeah.
Cogan's a new hero of mine for calling Jess Ghanem completely out to lunch and unqualified. I read that with great delight. But let's go back and back up. There's a firefight in Afghanistan on April 23rd, 2003, in which two great Americans, Jared Dennis and Ray Lozano, are killed. And this book is about the guy who killed them. And
Yeah.
What else do we need to set up at the beginning? That's kind of the framing I want people to understand. Two Americans, great Americans. One is a young kid, sweet boy, I think one of your protagonists calls him, little bit green, very country. Have I got that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Jared Dennis, 19 years old, from a Native American kid from Oklahoma. A little country is a good way to describe him. And he volunteers he joins the army before 9/11, and his family supports it because it's a way for him to get some direction. He's kind of directionless, and his family is worried about what's going to happen to him. Not really that uncommon a story, especially before 9/11. A way to save his life, to join the military.
And the tragedy is he loses his life in Afghanistan while being engaged in an attempt to flank the enemy, the terrorists who had come in. I'll come to Spingool in a second. But I sort of summed it up when I sit down after finishing a book. At one point, a guy named Bert LaCroix calls a guy named Major Drew Nathan in Grand Forks, North Dakota in October of 2012. It's almost a decade after the murder, the firefight. Yeah. In order to get to NCO Dwayne McKnight in Victorville, which is in the high desert of California, to obtain a brown Quran with a zipper, which is in his footlocker, so that it can be given to an unnamed FBI agent. And then LaCroix forgot about it and didn't send it to the forensic lab for weeks or months. I can't quite tell that detail. That's just wild. Did your head explode trying to retrace this stuff?
I mean, it's such an interesting story. When I heard this story for the first time and all the details about the sleuthing that the Americans, the assistant U.S. attorneys, and the FBI agents and the others endeavor to prove a case in 2011, 2012, 2013, to prove that this Al-Qaeda operative killed Americans, like you say, almost a decade before in 2003. And the meticulous detail and the investigative prowess they demonstrate, it's really remarkable. And they knew they had to draw an inside straight, and they did, and they were able to build this case. I don't know how much it's replicatable for every terrorist that kills Americans abroad. And this is the first and only, as of right now, the first and only foreign terrorist tried in a U.S. criminal court for killing U.S. service members in a battle zone, in a war zone. But it really was just such a remarkable story of sleuthing and a fight for justice, even if one thinks that terrorism should be confined to Gitmo and military commissions and not in the U.S. criminal justice system. The U.S. attorneys, the assistant U.S. attorneys, the FBI agents didn't have that option because A, it was the Obama years, and B, as you note, Italy was not going to turn Spingool over. They took him into custody. They were not going to turn him over if he was going to go to Gitmo or a military commission or if the death penalty were on the table. So they were kind of dictating the terms. But in any case, they did this remarkable job. And when I first heard the story from Assistant U.S. Attorney Dave Bitcower, I just, I love police procedurals. I love Cold Case, CSI, all those shows. And this was that, except real, true, on an international scale, and to lock up an al-Qaeda terrorist.
And it's going to open the eyes of everyone like me who thinks they actually know a lot about how the government does this, because I was at Justice for a while, and I've read the books and I followed the story. But here's how much I didn't know. I didn't know much about Brit. In fact, you need a scorecard to keep track. I ended up doing a scorecard. Brit, Shrev Ariel, they're AUSAs. You've got Ari Maharis, Roshana Mohammed, they're FBI agents. You've got Brett LaCroix, who is an Army counterintelligence civilian at DOD, 7 years on the case. Jim Hodgson, U.S. Army Criminal Investigative Division. John Ross, Bobby Losada, and then we've got the good guy psychiatrist, Mark, I can't find his name here, Mark Mills.
Yeah.
There are 20 people. The amount of time that goes into nailing Spingool for this murder, what do you imagine it is just in terms of hours spent by this American team?
Oh, I couldn't even compute. I mean, it starts in 2011 when Spingool is picked up by happenstance on this cruise ship that's been commandeered by Berlusconi during the Arab Spring to bring thousands of refugees from the southern Italian islands to the mainland. And he just happens to ask an Italian Green Beret for water, and the Italian Green Beret just happens to notice bullet scar in his arm, and ask him how he got them. And he says, I got them fighting Americans in Afghanistan. I'm with al-Qaeda. I don't belong with these refugees. And then it just proceeds until 2018. So that's 7 years of deep investigative work by a cast of dozens of people, and trips around the world, to Nigeria, to other places, to prove this case against him. I found it just so interesting. And again, whatever people think of how the war on terror should be prosecuted, these people are, patriots, and they were doing what they could to bring justice for these two families. Jared Dennis, you mentioned him before, a little bit country. He would write home and call home and talk about how the Afghans in the little area near Firebase Shkin, where they were headquartered, right near the Pakistan border, this is early in the war, that he would see that he got a kick out of the fact that they didn't brand their animals, they would dye them. So you'd see a bunch of chickens that were pink or whatever. And Roshana Mohammed, the FBI agent, she kept a photograph of a pink chicken on her desk to remind herself of this sweet boy that she was fighting to bring his killer to justice. So there are emotional moments like like that in the story that I learned, that I just, that really made me feel very good about the country and the people who try to keep us safe.
Oh, the backstory, and you were careful to include at least a couple of pages of backstory of each of the good guys. I think I appreciate that the most, because there are so many people involved in the war on terror, and they get no attention at all. And there are a lot of people who are going to say, that's me. I also didn't know about Domex, Domex,
Oh,
the
I didn't
database.
either.
Yeah. Tell people about that. It's wild, and I'm glad it's there.
Yeah, me too. So Domex is basically a creation of the post 9/11 world. If you imagine in your mind that last scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the Ark is put into a crate and shoved into a government facility or warehouse somewhere, that's what Domex is, except it's digital. It is every bit of information picked up from a battlefield or an FBI raid or a CIA raid, and it's to help people fight the war on terror. And using intelligence and using information collected from the enemy, dates back centuries when it comes to warfare. They had it during World War II. It's how they were able to fight the war against the Germans and the Japanese. I'm sure they had similar things for Americans on the other side. They had it during
Pause
Vietnam.
for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got to go to a break. I'm coming back with Jake
Right.
Tapper. I got
Okay.
another segment on this book, Race Against Terror, available now at Amazon. If you care about the war on terror, if you read The Looming Tower, this is an adjunct to that. Go and get it. I'll be right back with Jake. Don't go anywhere.
And a freight train running through the middle of my head, only you.
There you go.
My desire.
Welcome back, America. Springsteen is also in Race Against Terror, Jake Tapper's new book about spin goal. Now, Jake, I want to make sure we're talking about Domex. Let's finish that, and then let's tell the story of spin goal. I don't want people to feel sorry for him. However, no one should be sodomized by a Coke bottle in a Libyan prison for 5 years. So that's part of his journey. But I don't want anyone to feel sympathy for him. But finish Domex and then tell people the
Domex is
outline
just-
of the
it's just-
baddie.
It's a database with all sorts of information when it comes to the war on terror. And Jim Hodgson is this Rain Man-esque character in the book, who's a real person. I saw him last night at a book event. And he just has one of these brains that just remembers everything. And he was just a huge resource for the assistant U.S. attorneys when it came to, that person, I remember this memo, and then he could go on the computer and get a copy of the memo. And maybe there's a fingerprint on it, or maybe there was, all sorts of information, but it's collecting those dots. Again, like an unlikely patriot, this guy, Jim Hodgson, he's, when you think of an NCIS investigator, you probably think of Mark Harmon or something, and he is not that, but he just a huge asset in fighting the war on terror, just in terms of information.
Now, spin goal represents the problem that we have, which is immense. There are tens of thousands of spin goal. This is one. Yeah. At least we know one story well, and he's not a top guy. He's sort of a sad, tragic case. Give the quick background on him so we can talk about what we do with the other 100 million of them or 100,000 of them that are out there.
So his story, as you note, is probably not that uncommon. His parents were from Niger, but they went to Saudi Arabia for pilgrimage and never left, and so they were basically raised in indentured servitude. And Spingool is this. At the time, he was not called Spingool. Spingool, that's his nom de guerre. Spingool basically had no foreseeable future. He didn't know what to do with his life, and in his childhood, he hears these glorious stories of mujahideen, of jihadi fighters. And at this point, those stories are about people who beat the Soviets in Afghanistan, people who fought the Russians in Chechnya. And so he's inspired to join jihad. He basically gets recruited by a Saudi government official in the neighborhood, who himself was something of a legend. Next thing you know, he's on a rat line headed to Pakistan. Next thing you know, he's with a bunch of other disaffected or zealot young men learning how to fire guns and blow things up in the Al Farouk training camp in Afghanistan. And this is all before 9/11. And you touch on an issue here, which is that his story is really not that uncommon. A young man doesn't know really what to do, has been raised in an extremist version of Islam. Somebody gives him an idea of, this might be fun. This is the best thing you can do for your religion. If you die, then your family gets this money. And he has nothing else to do, and he ends up in this camp. Now, I think Spingool was a zealot, but there are probably other guys in that world who are just disaffected knuckleheads. And there are probably other guys who are just really, really violent, and this is a path for them. And it's not all one type of person. I think Spingool is probably very common in the sense that, like, maybe if there had been something else for him to do, he wouldn't have ended up a terrorist.
And there's a line which I think you wrote. There's a fine line between zealotry and insanity, and the task of the prosecutors and the investigators is to prove he is a zealot and not insane, and that is a classic criminal justice story. Now, our friends at Gitmo are down to 15. There are only 15 people left at Gitmo. The argument is for another day with other than you. You're just telling this story about whether Gitmo ought to be where these people go and await the reversal of Boumediene. And you don't even touch on that. But I do want people to know the people pushing for this are Lisa Monaco and John Brennan, because they've got the fallout of the Galani almost acquittal behind them. I'm glad you told that story. That Team Obama's not going to be happy you told that story, but I'm happy you told that story. The
Galani's
people pushing,
a really important story. Yeah, so Galani is the first and only Gitmo detainee ever tried in a criminal court, and he almost gets acquitted. He's tried for his role in the 1998 embassy bombings in Africa, and one of the witnesses, the key witness, gets thrown out because the U.S. only learned his name while Galani was in a black site under CIA interrogation. So that's thrown out, and the jury acquits him of 284 out of 285 charges. I gotta believe that the jury knew what they were doing by acquitting him on that one to make sure he didn't go free. But I don't know. But in any case, that was when they were trying to bring Spin Ghoul to the country to the U.S. for prosecution in 2011, 2012. The Galani trial was in everybody's mind because that was in 2010, and they were really, really worried. The people who opposed the extradition of Spin Ghoul to the U.S., that this would be another example, except this time it would go completely south. Because it's not easy to try terrorists in criminal court.
Now, all the evidence of the world far away, and something you brought out, which I very much appreciate. I've done 20 years, twice a year, talking to wounded soldiers in both long wars, and it takes a while for them to come and talk to me. They don't want to do it. There are a lot of people who do not want to cooperate with the prosecutors because they do not want to deal with the PTSD that comes with reliving that. Yeah. And I thought you dealt with that very carefully, very sympathetically, and so did the investigators. They understood. And I think generally people do understand. You agree with that?
I do, 100%. I mean, it's rough for these service members. It's rough when the prosecutors came. It's rough when I called or asked to meet with them, because you're basically saying, hey, will you tell me about the worst day of your life? The one that's, the day of your life that is responsible for why your marriage fell apart. The day of your life that is responsible for why you drink too much. And, they almost all of them cooperated with the prosecutors. Almost all of them cooperated with me. And I'm grateful, and I'm glad I was able to tell the story. And I have to say, Hugh, to this day, I'm still in touch with a lot of people from The Outpost, the book I wrote about Afghanistan that came out in 2012. I'm obviously still in touch with a lot of the guys from this book, from Race Against Terror. And I cannot overstate how much these fights, these wars, these battles, even if people are not physically wounded, how much it just really wreaks havoc on their lives until the end of their life. And I just see it every day. One of the guys from The Outpost just took his life a few weeks ago. It's just absolutely horrible.
Well, I think there's a third book, because it's a trilogy, because the War on Terror is still ongoing, and The Outpost is book 1, and this is book 2, which takes us up to 2013. And you got a lot of years left, so I hope there's a book 3 here. But Race Against Terror is in bookstores now. You ought to read it to find out the complexity and the wounding and the other side of trying to get people and put them into jail. Jake Tapper, thank you. We'll see you on CNN later today. It's a good day in the War on Terror because there's peace in Gaza, but I'm very glad to talk to you on this day as well. Thank you, Jake.